we are glad to be joined by Simcha Rothman, who is an attorney, but he's also an activist and an author. His book made a very big impact. He holds a degree from Tel Aviv University as well as Northwestern University, specializing on public constitutional law, serving as the legal advisor and really the most famous figure of the movement for governability and democracy, talking regularly about issues of politics, law, the structure of government, and the relationship between the government branches of Israel. And he has published last year his book about the party of the Supreme Court party, the ruling party of what's known by the Israeli acronym Bagatz, which is Israeli Supreme Court, and how Israel became a legalocracy. Okay, the constitutional revolution, which is, again, we'll talk about it in a minute. It's quite ridiculous, as Israel doesn't have a constitution. So talking about constitutional revolution is extremely unusual in a country where there is no constitution. And he is, as I said, he has been working closely and legally advising the Governability and Democracy movement for 8 years now, or about 8 years. And he has almost become the CEO for the Ministry of Justice last year. When he published his book, which was crowdfunded by many Israelis, both previous two ministers of justice came, not the current one, for reasons that we may understand by the end of this hour, but it was highly praised, and it helps understand what's going on with the judicial branch of Israel. And I think it's extremely important subject, the subject that people in Israel are aware of to a degree, but people outside of Israel, they are sometimes completely oblivious of the power of the judicial branch in Israel. Some have even referred to it as legal piracy. Richard Posner in the past. So what is different in the balance between government, different branches of government in other countries, let's say US or European countries, and the relationship between the different branches of government in Israel? Oh, by the way, you're more than welcome to introduce yourself if I forgot something, and I'm for sure I forgot something.
You did an excellent job. Thank you. Okay, it's really, as Netanel said, people don't understand. It took some time even to explain to people in Israel. So I was just finishing an op-ed for Tomorrow newspaper, saying that tomorrow in the Knesset there will be a vote on an override mechanism, a mechanism to add into the Israeli basic law that will allow the Knesset to legislate laws that the court canceled. Again, for people in countries that they have a constitution and they have a solid government structure that allow for the court to cancel laws based on the constitution, then it doesn't make any sense, because you want someone to check the parliament, so you give it to the court. If you give it back to the parliament, that what have you done? You don't have the checks. But in countries with parliament sovereignty, when you don't have a higher position than the parliament, you don't have a founding committee or founding fathers sitting in a meeting in Philadelphia and writing the Constitution, and then a special way to amend the Constitution, which are the countries that are working in the parliamentary system of Britain, for example, then it makes sense. The parliament is the sovereign is the representative of the sovereign, and they can basically do whatever they want. Again, to Americans, it might look strange, but if you read the Federalist Papers, for example, they show an example of, it's really extreme, and it happened only one time in the past, of course, but that the parliament, the British Parliament, the English Parliament extended its time, meaning it was elected for 3 or 4 years, and then they say, okay, we will serve 7 years. And it passed. It's okay, because no one can tell the parliament what to do. It's strange to people, again, and I saw the remark on the EU. No, even the EU court, which according to a law by the parliament has some power, he cannot cancel a parliament law. He can say that the parliament law, and even the courts in Britain can say that a law that was passed by the parliament in Britain is in contrast, it's against the EU convention, but it's still in effect until the parliament cancels the law. That's the way it is in Britain, that's the way it's in New Zealand, even in Canada, when they introduce some kind of judicial review, they put an override mechanism saying that the parliament can override and can give the law some kind of immunity against Supreme Court canceling the law. So that's one thing that's happening tomorrow. So I wrote the op-ed, and I started by saying that I will probably edit it out because it became maybe a little bit too harsh. But 25 years ago, but I deeply believe in what I'm going to say, and I'm sorry and I apologize before if someone will feel that it's too harsh or it's too strong, but I think it's true. That in 1 week in November, 25 years ago, the Israeli democracy was murdered. It was murdered twice. One time it was murdered on Motzei Shabbat, on that when
November 4th, 1995, right?
Yeah.
When Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated.
When Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated on Motzei Shabbat in Tel Aviv, and that was big news. Of course, it's changed Israeli democracy. It's changed the Israeli discourse. Israel is not the same before and after. I think everyone will agree. Doesn't matter what you think about his politics, what you think about what happened afterwards. I think everyone will agree that Israel is not the same before and after the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin. And that was the news of the week. Of course, what happened on the same week, 5 days after, on Thursday? No one knows. No one noticed it. It took one small block in the newspapers down, maybe in page number 14 or something. The Supreme Court decided that it can cancel Knesset laws in 1995, in November, in the week 5 days after Rabin was assassinated. Now, no one noticed, no one read, and it was actually, they didn't even cancel the law, they just wrote it. It was like, we're announcing that we are having this power, we're taking this power to cancel Knesset laws, that until then, the court never thought that he had, and no one else thought that the court had the power to cancel Knesset laws based on basic law, human rights and dignity, human freedom and dignity. And then he decided, okay, now I can cancel Knesset laws, and he did it, no one noticed, and it took some few years until he actually exercised this new power that he claimed for himself in 95. But the effect on the Israeli democracy was much worse. I have to say. Because since then, we, the people in Israel, we do not have the power to change the laws of Israel.
Okay. So, for instance, to summarize what you've said, the quite on the low side, not with a lot of publicity, there was a very crucial verdict issued in which the Supreme Court decided that judicial review of Knesset laws, parliament laws, is now part of the power of the judicial branch. What's so bad about it? Listen, you want to have checks and balances. The judiciary is not legislating and is not administrating. The administrative branch is not legislating, even though in Israel there is a close affinity between the the legislator and the administrative branch, and a law that there is almost no chance of passing a bill if it's not coordinated with the administrative branch. But each branch has its own checks and balances and ability to interact with the other branches. So what's so bad about the judicial branch being able to judicially review these laws? Moreover, some would say that it protects the minorities. Let's say tomorrow morning, the parliament in Israel legislates that, all redheads should be executed at sight, Who would protect those redheads?
Okay, so thank you very much for this question, because it's really bringing us to the next level. But just a side note, you said that in Israel you cannot pass a legislation, and it's very hard to pass a legislation against if you are not coordinated with the executive branch. Actually.
Oh, Simon, by the way, I didn't say that's my opinion, but I like to ask difficult questions,
In the US, you have the veto power for the president. You cannot pass a law in a regular majority if the president does not allow. So
let's say the US has a system. If it were not to be the US with such a long tradition of democracy, it's no different than Turkey, for that matter. The US, the executive branch and the president hold an enormous power, and without its tradition of people and democracy.
It's true, but if I have to say, that's not. You are taking me to some of the known lies that were laid down in order to protect the ruling party of Bagatz.
Sure, I'm doing it because it's part of the.
You're doing an excellent job, but let's keep just this for the next level. But I want to relate to what you said. You said, what's wrong with it? What's wrong if we have a check on the parliament? What is wrong? So where does power come from in a democracy? I know where the power came to the judiciary in the US to do judicial review on legislation and to do the checks and balances on the legislator. The legislator is not higher up in the hierarchy. He takes its power from the same document that he did not write. No one in the legislature today, or even during the founding time, no one in the legislature was giving himself the power to legislate. The power to legislate in the legislature in the US came from the Constitution, who was accepted by supermajority by the 13 states in a vote, different vote. They gave to the parliament limited powers, and when you give a limited power to someone, you need to check that he is within its powers. Who gave Israel the Constitution? that does that? Who is changing the constitution of Israel? Who has the power to add, to amend, to delete? It's the same parliament. So it doesn't make any sense that you will cancel a Knesset law that was passed in a supermajority sometimes. 80 Knesset members voted for something, and you say, oh, I think that the law that you passed now, with 80 Knesset members supporting it, oh, I think I need to cancel it. Why? Because in 1992, 32 Knesset members voted for a law that I think it's contradicts to your law. There is a contradiction between this law and that law. And I am waiving your view of today's Knesset from the view of the former Knesset, and I give the minority, 32 Knesset members of 1992, the supreme power to cancel your decision. It doesn't make any sense. And
okay, so basically what you're saying is that when we look for the source of power in those different systems, while, for instance, the American system, the judicial power stems from the Constitution, Israel's judiciary took a power for itself without any foundation in neither Constitution, because we don't have Constitution, nor in really constitutional law, because these laws did not mean what they interpret them to.
First, they did not mean. But I say, even if they did mean, during this Knesset sittings in the beginning, they passed an amendment to the basic law of the government. And they say that in order to change the basic law, that they enacted the basic law just for this government of Israel, this two-headed government, double-headed government of Netanel and Gantz. They changed the basic law that decides how it works, the government. Just imagine in the US, in November, someone else would win the election, or Trump will win the election, and he will have a majority in the House or in the Senate, and he will change and will decide that from now on there are two presidents for the US, and they have mutual power. And he decides this with a regular majority, and then he will write in the law with the Republican parties that will do his meetings for him. He will write in the in the law that in order to change the new just enacted law, you will need to have 80 Knesset members to change it. 80% of the Senate.
Oh, right.
Or two-thirds of the Senate in order to change it. Just imagine this kind of a situation. You say it's crazy. You would say, no, you cannot do that, right? So even if it was the meaning of the basic law, and the basic law would say, I want to block future majority to change what I wrote now, or to cancel it, I would say they don't hold this power. They cannot do it. You cannot limit yourself. In Hebrew law, you have hapeshe asar hu hapeshe etir. The one who says no is the one who says yes. You cannot.
So the legislator of a supermajority law has to have a supermajority of its own. Otherwise, it's unfair. That's basically.
I say that even if you have supermajority, he cannot limit, because there is no rule of supermajority in Israel in the parliament. But that's besides the point. So first, it doesn't make any sense to do this kind of limit, because we don't have a constitution. We accept our laws in a regular way. But that's a technicality. To tell you that, okay, that's a technicality. I would say that what is behind it is the idea saying there are underlying thoughts. A, if Parliament is left alone he will hurt the minority.
All the redheads.
The redheads in this example. B, if there is a majority in the public who wants to hurt the redheads, the judges will be the ones that will block it. C, if there will be a majority and the judges will block it, the majority will listen to the judges, because what happens if the judges give a decision that the majority does not like, and it's not a one-time thing, it's a profound argument in the society. So either you get rid of your judges, or you change the system and take power for them, or you go to a civil war. You know who went to a civil war because the ruling of the court, they didn't like the ruling of the court on a constitutional matter?
America.
Yeah, of course, Dred Scott. So the Supreme Court decided Dred Scott. He did not protect the minorities in that case, if you care about it. But the decision in the Supreme Court that said, oh, Parliament, you cannot legislate against the Constitution, the way we see the Constitution, the way we defend the rights of the states of the South to have slaves, then we will cancel your laws. The outcome, a civil war, a decision, an amendment to the Constitution to finish the civil war. So that's what happened when you have a clash between the will of the judges and the will of the public. And I say all three assumptions are wrong. A, the best system to defend minorities is an open parliament that allows, especially parliament in the system of Israel, because the parliament in the system of the US, you can be a big minority and still have almost zero representation in the...
If you're spread around, because it's local.
Yeah. Because of the system. But in Israel, it's enough that you have 30,000, 40,000 people, you will have a seat in the Knesset. And you can do some deals and make your power even stronger by joining one of the parties and changing their people. So minorities in Israel are well protected in the system by itself. And B, if for some reason Israel will want to hurt minorities, the court will be the first to do it, not the last. And I know it from the history because
15 years ago.
Because most of the rulings of the Supreme Court that were addressing equality issues went against the minority of the ultra-Orthodox. Most of them, 81% to be exact. So that whenever the court says, I am talking about equality, he usually uses the power, the anti-majoritarian power he has against the minority of the ultra-Orthodox in canceling the draft laws for 3 times, in canceling some kind of budgets they got. So he's working against the minority, and it's not unique to Israel. Again, I gave the example of Dred Scott. Dred Scott is the first ruling in the world where court said, I don't like a law and I'm canceling it because it's against the substance of the Constitution, not procedural, not, oh, you didn't pass it in the right house or in the right vote. So it's not procedural, it's substantial. I don't like this law. And it was against the minorities. It was not against the majority. The ruling worked for the majority because the judges are coming from an elite group that the majority has his best interest to and the best opportunity to appoint them, and they share the view of the majority. So that, and in Israel today, even though we have 20%, almost 20% Arabs, we don't have 20% Arab judges in the Supreme Court or in lower courts. Even though we have almost 20% ultra-Orthodox, or even a little bit more if you look at the Knesset, we have a lot of ultra-Orthodox in Israel. We don't have 20% ultra-Orthodox in the Supreme Court. We don't have even one ultra-Orthodox judge in the Supreme Court. We have some representation for the religious, national religious community, even over-representation of the national religious community, if you will look at it like that. But we have 0 Ethiopian, 0 Russian, there are more than a million Russians in Israel. No, we have now Judge Stein, who is, he came, but it's just recently. We have,
right, and he had to go through America to get.
Yeah, he had to go through America to become a judge, and so it's not representative of the minorities in Israel. I'm not even starting to talk about Sephardi, Ashkenazi
division,
diversity, and the chances that a court that has no ultra-Orthodox representation will defend the rights of the ultra-Orthodox minority more than the Knesset is a joke. So I don't believe it, and I don't. So that's the 3 main lies that the court tells itself and the public in Israel in order to keep the power in the hands of the judges.
Okay, so we've talked about the relationship between the different branches of government. Now I want to get into the elements within the judiciary branch. Just, kind of a bit of a tail to the previous subject. I should say that as far as the ultra-Orthodox, there are both sides to the story. They don't want to sit on the court as well. Last time they were offered, I think by L.L.M. Barak, offered to Rabbi Shlomo Daichovsky to sit on the Supreme Court. He rejected it after consulting with chief rabbis, not chief rabbis, but the leading rabbis of the ultra-Orthodox community. So both sides don't want to sit, don't want the ultra-Orthodox to sit there. But that's kind of beside the point. Let's go into the issues within the judiciary that make it to be as it is. And I want to start with a crazy way in which judges can duplicate themselves. It's a little bit like a meiotic, in the committee that appoints judges and justices in Israel, and how does that work, and how it contributes to the judiciary being a closed group that can stay in elite group that is over-representing a very, very small section of the population.
Yes, so let's assume that everything that I said until now, and by the way, what I'm going to say now is a good example to all what's happening in Israel when you talk about the justice system or the legal system as a whole. We have uniques. Israel is unique in almost every aspect you can imagine. There is no other country in the world that you have a court like Bagatz that sits as a first and last resort of questions that you can go directly to it without any. You don't need to show standing. You don't need to show any reason why you came. You can get up in the morning and say, "Oh, I don't like this law. I'm going to go to the Supreme Court and ask it to cancel it," and they will listen and might even do it. Even you
right,
didn't.
Listen, it's the country with the most lawyers per capita. It's to be expected. Like.
yeah, but I don't know. I think the U.S. has more Jewish lawyers, so I'm not sure it's. But anyway, it's a big problem because you cannot even appeal the decision. The scope of the intervention is unbelievable. If I want to open it to questions, how many cases the Supreme Court of the U.S. deals with every year? If you know the number, you can show in your hands almost.
I have no idea. Anyway,
you have no idea, Netanel?
No
okay,
idea.
So I will tell you. No, you know what? First, I'm going to tell you the number of cases the Supreme Court of Israel deals with every year, okay?
Okay.
Recently, the number went down to 10,000 cases a year in Israel. Now guess the number in the US. I have to remind you, before you do the guess, just a second, I have to remind you, Israel population is
right. 9
about
million
9
versus
million.
350 roughly.
US population, I'm sorry, I'm not up to date with the numbers of the coronavirus, but I think it's still much, much higher.
Right.
The numbers are much higher. The land, the economy, the whatever aspect you look at, Israel versus US, we're smaller. I'm not sure everyone knows it, because if you look in the international media, Israel is mentioned much more. So I'm not sure everyone knows it, but let's just assume that Israel is smaller than the US. How many cases do you think the US Supreme Court has every year?
I really don't know. That's the truth of it, but I have to guess. They have a different system, right? They have the circuit courts and district courts, and so you know, it would be beyond me even to guess. But I'll take a number. Let's take off 2 orders of magnitude. So if instead of 10,000 we go for 1,100, so let's go 500 cases.
Okay, 500, and see Simon said 600. Okay, right. You are so wrong. The number is about like 60.
60, right.
So when you talk about 60, some years 80, I think the top in the past, I think the busiest year in the history of the Supreme Court of the US was about 200 cases. It was the busiest year ever. In Israel, there were years we had 15,000. But, okay, so when you say that the Supreme Court of the US, and you hear this criticism in the US, is intervening too much, right? You heard, so some people heard this criticism of the Supreme Court in the US.
Sure.
I think the most the Supreme Court can intervene too much in a year is 100 times, 60, 80, 100, okay? In Israel, if the court intervened too much, he is doing it thousands of times every year. He's basically running Israel. They make
but it should be said that the Supreme Court in Israel has several hats, in that sense that it is the chief appellate court and it's the chief administrative court and all kinds of other things which I don't know.
Also the US Supreme Court. Also the US Supreme Court. Also the US Supreme Court hears criminal cases and civil cases and constitutional cases and administrative cases. He hears it all. So they have the same role. The thing is the numbers. The numbers and the standing and the scope of intervention. So some people say
we as public get our money worth. They work harder.
They work harder. They make us work harder. So when you talk about, some people will, I don't know how influential my talk will be, but if you will be as shocked as I was when I first saw the numbers, you will probably go out and talk to your friends, to your other friends in Israel. You probably have. So, and you will say, we heard in a terrible lecture, we heard something very bad, that we cannot go to sleep at night. We heard the Supreme Court of Israel is very activist and he deals with a lot of issues. And your friend in Israel will tell you, oh, the lies, the right-wing people, they lie all the time. Oh, liars. The Supreme Court of Israel is 96% of the number of the cases that come to it, he rejects. He does not give what the people ask for. First, it's not true. We can talk about it maybe some other time. But just imagine they are 100% correct. The 4% is much more than all the cases in the US Supreme Court altogether. So even if it was true, and it's not true, it's still much more intervention than you can imagine in the Supreme Court of a country. Now, and it's intervention in the way Israel conducts its warfare, cases that would be never heard in any other country in the world. You cannot find an example, I dare you to find an example of a court telling, criticizing in real time the rules of engagement, the laws of engagement of battle. I dare you to find a ruling from a court around the world in real time telling commanders in the army, oh, you have to go through this direction or that direction during war, not after saying, oh, you did wrong, you have to pay damages. That's okay. That's what courts are for. During wartime, the commanders needs to go and explain to the Supreme Court what they are doing. They did it. It's all happened in Israel. During a court that 4 times canceled legislation on immigration policy, 4 times, 3 times on the draft law. It deals with foreign relations. Any aspect you can imagine, the court in Israel touched it. And even worse, said that he can touch it. Even if he didn't do anything, it actually said it. But that kind of intervention by now let's talk, and Netanel said, how are they picked? If we would pick our judges, we will choose them. We will vote for them. We will be able to vote them out, like some states in the US have the option. You vote for a judge, and then he runs for a second time, and if he's doing a bad job, you can say, I'm not voting for you anymore, right? In Israel, I'm not talking about the federal system, which they are appointed by elected officials, and then it's a life tenure. But in Israel, judges are appointed by a committee of 9 people. The committee of 9 people is assembled by 3 Supreme Court judges, sitting Supreme Court judges, that they choose themselves who will sit there. So judges has 3 out of the 9, 2 members of the bar, which usually are working together. Usually that was the case for many years, working with the court. So the legal profession has 5 out of 9. I can stop here because everyone who knows numbers knows that 5 out of 9, it doesn't really matter what the other 4 say. But let's continue. The other 4 are 2 ministers and 2 Knesset members, which usually, so today it's a little bit different, but usually one of the Knesset members is from the coalition and one is from the opposition. So the government and 1 Knesset member are 3 members. The majority of the public in Israel have 3 votes out of 9 in the committee that appoint judges to the highest court.
Right. And moreover, if I may add, in order to appoint the Supreme Justice, you have to have 7 out of 9 votes, and the block of 3 Supreme Court justices, sitting justices, has always, and if I'm wrong, I'll stand corrected, they have always voted together, even though it is explicitly said that each and everyone has to vote according to their own conscience and stuff like that. They have always voted as a block of 3. So de facto they have a veto, even if there is a majority of all other 6 to appoint a justice into the Supreme Court. The sitting judges would have a veto to prevent that appointment, right?
So, for example, even if tomorrow morning the majority of Israel decide that they want to appoint me to the Supreme Court, they can't do it. Even if the government agrees and the Knesset agrees, they cannot appoint me because the current sitting judges will be able to block anyone they don't like.
Why wouldn't they like you sitting
I
with them?
have no
They
idea.
have
I have
no
no
reason.
idea.
No
I
reason.
always,
I assume that they will back you up. I think they'll vote
yeah, I'm sure.
automatically for you.
I'm sure. So that's create effectively, that's very effective to prevent any debate in the court. What happened in the past few years is with very smart politics, former Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked, she was able to work the system a little bit. She got some good appointments in, although it was very, very hard, and she had to pay a lot of prices in order to do it. But she got some few good judges in the system.
We had her advisor, Gil Bringer, talking with us about this in the past.
And she did some good job on that, but it's still that's the very late, and it's not enough. It's not enough because the law system, the justice system in Israel. Now let's just do a little bit zoom out, because a question that I always get is, okay, so what do you think? We don't need the court. You started with it, Netanel, when you said, you don't want to check the parliament. What will happen if? A better question would be, you don't want to check the government? And I agree. I'm not a supporter of big government, and I don't like the government to have all the power. And I think that the court has an important role in doing, in checking and balancing the executive, the government, the elected, even the elected officials. But he needs to do it as working for the legislator, meaning I need to check that you're working according to the law that gave you the power, because the law is the ruler. The rule of law is the basic principle of any country, any normal country, is the rule of law and not the rule of man. Now the court, if he would do it, and he would do it according to the law, I would say, oh, you're doing a great job. But what the court does, and I would say after we will fix all the system and fix all the problems in the system in Israel, we won't be able to fix the real problem, because the real problem is the way the court interprets laws and interpret basic laws and interpret its own ruling. Because in Israel, you have some judges in the US that do the same, but they are doing it with much more carefulness. But in Israel, the method of interpretation of law is not to understand what the law says. It's not to understand what the law means. It's to understand what the law should mean, what the judge think that the law should mean. Now, if you understand the extreme power this kind of interpretation gives to judges, there is no limit. You can actually read rulings in Israel saying, the law says A, B, C. I can show you that the legislator meant A, B, C, but I will do D. And the reason I will do D is because the objective purpose, that's the words they use, the objective purpose of the law is to further human rights. as we see them. And if the interpretation of the law, the words of the law, or the meaning of the law is against human rights as we see them, we will read the law in a different way. We will make the law a meaning that it's neither written there or meant. And the court does that. The court even had the guts to say that. A famous quote by Justice Barak, he says, the words of the law are not fortresses that needs to be approached by the use of dictionary. The words of the law are a wrap on a living idea, breathing and alive, that we give it the meaning.
A judge and a poet.
This method of interpretation is called the death of the poet, because when you read the poem, you don't really care what did the writer meant. It can be dead for years. We still read a poem by Shakespeare or whatever, and we're not living it according to it, and we are trying to give it the interpretations that talks to our culture and ideas. And it's okay, because it's not a binding. No one can put you in jail because you misinterpreted a Shakespeare poem. But if you don't interpret law correctly, you can go to jail, you can pay a fine, or you can lose your case, your house, your family. And if the court use it to its own will, we're not in a country of a rule of law, we are a country of a rule by man.
Right.
Whatever they will decide tomorrow morning, that will be the new rule.
Right. I just want to say that one can be thrown to jail for misinterpreting the Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare. But depends really how bad you misinterpret it. Yeah, that's one thing. A point that I want to make, I want to hear more about from your book is you demonstrate how the judicial activity or judicial activism really supports, and you kind of touched on it when you talked about wartime decisions and wartime cases of the Supreme Court, how the Supreme Court, in a sense, is helping terrorist activities, as well as in another chapter, equating Zionism with racism, maybe not intentionally, but definitely inadvertently, or maybe not inadvertently. You'll say, you know, both these points are very important for anyone who wants to see Israel strong and Zionist. And you say that the judicial activity is hindering that.
Yeah, when Justice Cheshin left the Supreme Court, he was the
deputy, I think, right?
Yeah, he was the deputy Chief Justice. He said in an interview to Haaretz, he said, Barak is ready that 30 or 50 people will blow up, but we will have human rights. Now, it's a harsh saying, but we have to understand, until 9/11, most civilized countries in the world, democratic countries in the world, never faced a real threat of terror. It was something you would read maybe once in a while. You would have some strange event of a plane that was hijacked or something, but it wasn't a present threat to civilized countries. And Israel is under a threat of extinction by terror or by war since the day it was founded, even before. Other countries in the world, when they faced this kind of a challenge dealing with terror, they acted in ways that Israel either did not do, or either they would do exactly the same as Israel did, learn from Israel's experience, or they would be even more harsh. And I think the Patriot Act in the US was against some basic human rights that Americans used to think of protected by the Constitution. It was for good reasons. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not saying it was bad law. It was needed because for the first time, the US faced a threat that the states did not know how to deal with. So they used the means they had, or created by the legislation, better means to deal with kind of threat. Other countries behaved even worse. In the US also, you had what Snowden exposed, all this mechanism to espionage to spy on your own citizens, because for major threats in Israel, although we had it from the beginning, we had human rights, we had democracy, elections were held in time, usually, even sometimes
more frequently than right.
Much more than needed. We have many elections. We're very, very good at the elections. And the Supreme Court was hearing cases about human rights issues, even for people who are not citizens and are not residents of Israel, the Arabs in Judea and Samaria. And they have the Arabs in Judea and Samaria who they don't have a vote in Israel. They don't have a vote. So now they have votes in the Palestinian Authority. They get better human rights than most Arabs in Arab-controlled countries. So I don't think Israel has anything to be ashamed for when you're talking about preserving human rights in a time of emergency, in a time of threat, in a time of you can have criticism, but I think Israel dealt with the issue of human rights versus national security better than most countries in the world. I think you can say it very, very easily.
And when you say better, you mean in a more moderate fashion, not infringing upon individual rights.
Yeah, it's a conflict. Human rights and national security are many times have something got to give. Most countries, when they're facing this kind of threat, they just almost ignore human rights and prefer national security all the time. Israel did not do it. Some would criticize it from that because that's the kind of criticism Justice Cheshin did on Barak. He says, in order to have human rights, you are careless. You are willing for Israelis, for Jews to be slaughtered in terrorist attacks. What you care is you say, oh, I kept human rights. That's not the good balance. I don't know what is the good balance, I have to say. There is some limit to everything. You need to balance everything. But I do know that in a democratic country, I want the balance to be decided by the people. Because the rights of the people for their lives, that's the basic reason to have a country or a state. You cannot have some other people decide for me what I'm willing to give away. That's not acceptable. That's what the court did in Israel. And that's the same way other countries do not have a problem of a big minority that wants to destroy big parts of them, wants to destroy the very state that they are living in. It's not a threat that most countries know how to deal with. To say, oh, we want to give minorities equal rights and let them decide and let them live wherever they want and build wherever they want, and we don't want to have a Jewish settlement because it's racism. You can do it, but then you will lose the Negev and you will lose the Galil, because some parts of it will be no man land by minorities that does not respect your sovereignty. And then they will decide later they want to join Syria or Lebanon or Egypt. You cannot allow it to yourself for reasons of national security. And you cannot allow it for yourself because the main reason the state of Israel exists is that the Jewish people will have its own country. And that's the reason the state exists. Now, if you do not respect it, even if you are a justice in the Supreme Court of Israel, you are working against the state of Israel. That's the kind of ruling the Supreme Court made, and Netanel meant the ruling that that said that you cannot have, that the state of Israel cannot have a Jewish settlement. You cannot designate areas to say that you want to build a Jewish settlement in some place, meaning some people would say, oh, of course, it's racism. You can't have, it's a separate but equal. But Israel is not the state, is not the US. It's not a country that oppressed their minorities. It's not a country that we didn't have slaves. Arabs were never our slaves. Arabs, some of them, were our enemies. It's a different issue. To deal with an enemy and to deal with your own citizens that has a problem, it's a different issue. And when people do and try to not understand the complexity of the state of Israel and say, oh, we don't care. We care only about universal global human rights. We want the state of Israel to deal with its issues the same way Norway deals with its issues. So first, show me that Norway did such a good job in dealing with its own issues. But second thing is, we don't have the same issues. And that's why, and we know what our issues are. We, the people of Israel, we know what our issues are. And when the Supreme Court says, no, you cannot legislate your own will, I will change your legislation. I will not accept your views of the balance between national security and human rights. We, the people of Israel, we are losing our sovereignty. I can never pronounce it right. Sovereignty.
Okay. Yeah, you did well. Sovereignty, indeed. Or sovereignty, you can go.
Sovereignty. I always
you can go. Both of them could fly. Okay. I wanna ask, how can people who are here and hear about this very important issue and your attempt of the governability and democracy movement to kind of how can people help in whichever way, be that explaining these issues or supporting this cause? How can people around the world help keep Israel in a sense Jewish and democratic, and keep the Supreme Court and judiciary in check through this NGO activity?
So first, of course, the most important for this kind of organization is to be able to operate. We need money. Sorry for the blunt words. We need support. We need money. We need donations and we do we have a 10 points program for the Knesset to legislate and for the government to decide, to change, to revise the system in many ways. We talked about judges' appointment. We talked about that. We didn't talk about the Attorney General and the problem.
Right. It's on the paper. It's on the paper, but there is so much stuff we didn't get to talk about.
It needed to be changed. We didn't talk about the role and the power of the Knesset to supervise the courts with the conflict of interest. There are many issues. Every issue, we as an organization, we prepare research papers. We talk about it in media. We usually have like 10 media appearances a week. It's very influential in Israel, this kind of event. We write, we talk to decision makers, we prepare laws. One of the major laws that we helped pass, we helped pass many laws, but one of the laws that we created from scratch and we pushed from the beginning to the end is the law the judges will need to have the declaration of assets. And some people will not understand that how it did not happen before, but judges in the system were built in Israel are beyond any doubt. And if you are a minister, you need to declare your assets. If you're a Knesset member, you need to declare your assets. If you are a judge and you can decide on billions of shekels from one side to the other by a single vote, then there was no need for declaration of assets. We changed that. There are many Knesset, many bills that are in the Knesset today. We rewrote them and we pushed them. The current justice minister even addressed it and said it on the Knesset. So all this kind of work need a constant presence in the Knesset and in the research, and that's the first and easy way to help us is to support us regularly or one time in donation. We have 501c3 for the US, and we have Chapter 46 in Israel, and all the papers ready. So if anyone wants to help in this matter, more than welcome, and it's very important. Another way we started to have, I have to say, we neglected a little bit the English media, English social media. We started to change that recently. We have a Facebook page in English, and we're trying to get more of our work in English in the newsletter. You can join and to know what's going on and to invite to lectures like that in English. I think the more people will know the problem, we believe in democracy, so more people will know the problem, more people will vote the right way, and that will work.
Is there a way to join like a newsletter or something, a link, or because your website is mainly in Hebrew? I didn't see.
Yeah, we are working on that. We're working on that, but I'm send an email to office@meshilut.org. I'm writing the email to join the newsletter. And if you want to donate to Meshilut, I'm putting the link also.
Governability, yeah. The movement for governability and democracy.
Democracy, Meshilut is the Hebrew for governability. This is the link. If you are reading Hebrew, if your Hebrew is good enough for reading, then you can order the book and read it. If your Hebrew is not good enough for reading, you are more than welcome to support the translation. We want to have the book. This book has become, I have to say that I did not know how effective this book will be. It became a bestseller. Usually this kind of books that deal with the justice system are not the best-selling books in Israel. This apparently hit a right spot. We already did 3 printings of this book, and it's I think in the top 2 or 3% of the books from this kind in sales in Israel. Many people read it. Many politicians read it. Many news people and journalists read it, and it's very influential. We want to get it out in English. If you can help with that, or know someone that can help with that, with the translation and the publishing of it in English, we have already started working on it. But again, it needs the support to get out, because we're only working on donations. We don't get money from the government. We don't get
surprisingly enough.
We don't, that the courts, the judges of the Supreme Court, they do not donate us money for some strange reasons, and also not unlike our rivals from the left in Israel, we do not get money from the New Israel Fund or from the EU or from some other friendly guys. We are only by the support of good Jewish people. So that's the way to help us. And I hope when flights will start again, if you can arrange a group, you want me to come to the US, talk, explain to people.
Not just the US, people here are from all over the world, really. Europe and even the Middle East. We have someone from Abu Dhabi here, from Africa.
So Abu Dhabi, I don't know if my passport will work, but I actually, we came and spoke to people, of course, in the US, but also in Italy. We have in Australia, some people wanted us to come. Now the Corona started. It's a little bit harder, but I think the issues. Any person who is involved with Israel and wants Israel, the state of Israel, to flourish and to succeed, needs to know this. I met with some people who are very. They help a lot. They give a lot to the US, the friends of the IDF or whatever, and I told them, you can bring the best tanks to Israel. You can bring the best fighter planes for Israel. You can give everything to soldiers of Israel, but if they cannot act to protect Israel because some legal advisor that is directed by the Supreme Court preventing them from doing what's right, it won't help. It just won't help. So that's what we are trying to do, and we see success, and I hope we'll see more with your help and with everything.
Right. I don't want to infringe on your time more than we did already, but there are few questions from the crowd. I hope they'll be tough.
Me too.
So yeah, Simon, I'm sure you have a good question.
Well, I hope I have a tough question. Thank you for that presentation. There was so much information in there. As I was taking my notes, you were answering the question that I was about to ask you. I just want to give you a bit of my own background. Because I'm British doesn't mean I'm pro-British. I have problems with our Supreme Court and our legal system, and I basically refuse to work in it. So I'm not operating on any kind of partisan basis. But I suppose the one question which I think you probably could address is, can you see a situation where everyone has equal civil rights before the court, even if that person is the enemy of your state?
I think not only I can see that, I think that's the case in Israel. I think that in Israel, civil rights in the courts or in the government or in the Knesset, enemies of the state hold the civil rights that a Jewish person have, ultra-Orthodox person have. We have definitely we don't have a system like countries around the world used to have of government-sponsored discrimination. It's not the case. It almost never was the case. There were a few years in the beginning of the State of Israel when Arab areas were under military regime because of security issues. But an Arab and the Jews, they pay the same taxes, they get the same services, they enjoy all the civil rights. The debate is not on civil rights. There is no debate that I know of in Israel. I don't know any political party in Israel, not even the most extreme right wing, that says Arabs should not have civil rights in Israel based on their ethnicity, or there is still some debate if a person can lose his citizenship or residency if he's a terrorist. And you have rules like that in Europe, in France, and it's a limit when you are convicted of a terrorist act. It's not based on anything else. That's a question, that's a debate. But there is no debate that everyone will get the same civil rights. There is a debate about collective rights. Collective rights saying, I don't want a civil right for myself. I don't want my property to be protected. I don't want my dignity to be protected. I want you to recognize me as a group, and I want you to give me special privileges because I am Arab, Muslim, whatever. This, first, I think, not everyone, no other countries is obligated to give, and most countries do not give to their minorities the collective right to self-determination in some kind or whatever. It's a decision of every country based on its issues, whatever the case is for the certain minority or the certain group. I think the Druze minority in Israel who decided to join as a group the State of Israel, the army, they get recognition much beyond their numbers without any racism towards them, because it was a decision of the State of Israel that the Druze minorities that decided to join the army and fight with us hand to hand and protect us. And they are, you hear the people and you hear the government talk about the Druze. Everyone talk about the Druze, which are small groups. They get recognition and they get respect and they get some kind of collective rights because of a decision of the state. It's a legitimate decision. And I think even more that if you are part of a group that wants to kill me, if you are part of a group that sees me as an enemy, it would sometimes be irresponsible for the government or the state to give you the collective rights that will be used against the majority or the people or the life or the security or the dignity of the Jewish people.
Okay, thank you very much. And last question, Nick.
Thank you, that was very helpful.
Thank you.
Nick?
Yes. What percentage of like the legislation and laws and rules of engagement does Israel use from the Torah? Has anybody ever really done any real study and research on that and really applying it to modern Israel?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think it can be a topic for a whole discussion, like
It could
how much Jewish law is incorporated into Israeli law.
Right.
Yeah, but I'll have Simcha, go ahead.
Thank you.
I would sadly say that most of our Israeli law has, some of it is irrelevant, but most things that can be relevant and we can learn from Jewish law, we did not have either the guts or the will to deal with. The major issues the Jewish law is in effect in Israel, when you are talking about Jews, are family law. Family law in Israel is based on religion. So,
or the congregate, the synagogue kind of thing.
No.
Just a second. Maybe in Israel there is no official separation of church and state, which means that when it comes to family law, everyone has to marry and divorce. Generally speaking, again, putting aside like miscellaneous, everybody has to marry and divorce through their religious institution. So if you're a Christian, it has to be through the church. If you're a Muslim, it has to be through Sharia court. If you're a Jew, it has to be through the rabbinate. Okay, but it's not that Israel as a state adopted the laws of Torah and applied it.
Right.
Yeah. Most of, because of the majority of Israel are Jews, so when the court deals with family law, even a secular court, for some issues, will apply the rabbinical, the halacha, or the Jewish law on some issues. That's because of this word system that we inherited, and it solves some problem and it creates some other problems, and it's very complicated. In many other aspects, the laws of Israel are just as any other country. There is a law from the 80s that said that when there is a lacuna, something, there is no answer in the legislation or in the rulings of the court should go and seek for ideas from the principles of the justice, freedom, and peace that are part of the Jewish tradition. Recently, they added to this law that says that when there is no other anything else in the law, you can not only from the principles of freedom, justice, and peace, but also from the principles of the Hebrew law. So today, it's recent, it's like 3 or 4 years ago, the Knesset said that when there is no otherwise saying law, the courts should try to apply a relevant halachic law to the case. It's rarely happened. It needs to happen more because I think the Jewish law has a lot to teach any country, and definitely the Jewish state. I know some organizations that deals with it, try to do this implementation of halachic law into modern life. One of those organizations have me come every year and do a mock trial on an issue and try to write the case law for halachic law and the Israeli law on the case. I am trying to help them as much as I can and to come every year and to prepare the mock trial. But there are some organizations above that, and it's very interesting, and I hope one day the courts will use it more.
Right, my brother is involved in that, as you know.
I worked with your brother to write a textbook on one of the issues of halachic law in the Israeli.
Right, my brother is heavily involved in that as well as many other things.
As an American and a Westerner, studying the Torah and stuff, and I could probably speak on behalf of many Westerners, and that they would love to see something like that happen in Israel.
I agree, and again, I'm involved in some of the the initiatives to do it, but it's not part of what I do in Meshilut. I do it because I think it's important and on my not free time, but I think it's something needs to be done more thoroughly.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Simcha, it was a great pleasure having you. It was absolutely interesting and fascinating. And thank you for taking time of your very, very tight schedule as it is. We have not talked about so many things that we should have talked, but we, I think, covered many issues nonetheless. And thank you again for coming. We have this thing when we give our hands for the guests that come to visit us. So thank you very much for coming and sharing.
Thank you.
Come again.
And thank you very much.
Thank you
People
very much.
really want to hear you again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Come back.
Thank you.
and if you
Glad to
want,
bring you back.
I'm writing down my email if you want to. I'm not. I can't promise very long answers to all issues, but if you want to approach me for some reason, I'm writing down my personal email. You can send email there. If Netanel wants, you can give you my phone number. I am trying to be as available to people for questions for every issue.
Listen, one has to have a lawyer in the speed dial, just in case. You never know.
Yeah, no, I'm not. If you're calling me for lawyers, I'm charging by the hour. If you're asking me how to try to help the state of Israel, then I'm charging you by the hour.
If you come again, we could all benefit.
We want you
If you come
back.
again, we can all benefit from the questions that other people ask. So we'd like you to come again.
Right. Oh,
Thank you.
Whenever Netanel will tell me to come, I will come. To Netanel, I can never say no.
Oh,
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
thank
Okay.
you. Bye-bye, Simcha.
Bye-bye.
Guys,
Bye.
tomorrow we have Professor Everett Fox, and on Thursday we have Dr. Miri Kahana. With Professor Everett Fox, we'll talk about translating the Bible, and I urge you to look up his translation of the Bible. Very interesting. I'm excited. I love this subject, and constantly people come and ask me about it. So don't miss it. Bring friends, because he is really one of the only individuals who have actually set and translated the Bible individually. He has not finished the work yet, but he's been working at it in the past 25 years, and it's an amazing job, in my opinion, one of the best translations. As well as on Thursday with Dr. Miri Kahana, we'll talk about the Aramaic Jewish translations, as well as women in Torah studies. And that's that. Thank you.
Where can we read that? Everett Fox Bible?
Oh, it's not available. You can. I think a PDF you can get online. I have. You know what? I'll send you today. I'll try this evening to take the time to send everybody. Let's say Genesis 1, Genesis 1, and Genesis 49 of his translation. Which are two chapters that may come up in our conversation tomorrow.
Oh.
Okay?
Can I ask a quick question, Netanel?
Sure.
And I'm sorry to hassle you about this. I'm really sorry to have missed Sunday's lesson. And as you know,
I know you wrote to me about that. I don't know. Listen,
I keep hassling you, don't I?
right, it's all right, but I'm saying I'm not, putting. I don't have anyone running my social media, so I don't have anyone like sitting and editing the video and putting them on YouTube.
Yeah.
So if you want, my laptop is here. If you come and you do it, you can.
I might just have to get over it.
Okay, no, but I'll try to.
Thank you very much.
Make it available. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.